Hi, Jay here. Welcome back. Tonight's stories weren't just chosen by me, they came from you. This is another viewer suggestion special, where I take your ideas and I dig up the darkest, strangest tales I can find. In this installment, we'll follow a lone cyclist bedding down for the night in the mountains, only to hear a voice calling closer and closer through the dark. We'll step into an abandoned restaurant, with something far more dangerous waiting inside than peeling paint. And we'll meet the owner of a white clay fox mask, who discovers it has ideas of its own and where it should be returned. If you've got an idea for the next viewer suggestion video, drop it in the comments. I usually post these at the end of the month, often with a live stream to read through your submissions and just hang out. Also, I will put up a community post, so keep an eye on that to leave your ideas. Your suggestion might even make it to the next video. Now get comfortable, turn the lights down, and let's see what horrors you've summoned this month. Here's the bells. If you ever find yourself driving a mountain road at night, don't ever turn your headlights off. Seriously, just don't. I've always liked driving in the dark, not in a reckless way or anything, but there's something calming about it. Just me and the road, no traffic, nothing but the sound of the engine and the blackness stretching out ahead. Sometimes when I'm out on a mountain road late at night, I mess around a bit. I'll flick the headlights off just for a second and go, damn, it's dark out here. I don't know, it's just a stupid habit, but it always gave me a little thrill, and I guess I'm not the only person who's done this, right? Anyway, this was last year, during Obon. I was heading back to my parents' place, trying to avoid the evening traffic. I took a back route through the mountains, figured it would be faster, and maybe even relaxing. The sun had just set when I started the drive, but by 9 p.m. the road was pitch black, not city dark, mountain dark. No streetlights, no houses, just trees. So there I was, cruising through the woods, and I figured, hey, why not? Just for a second. I reached down and I flicked the switch. Click, click. Headlights off. Total darkness. Then back on again. Just that split second of darkness. But in the instant the beams came back on, something slammed into the windshield, hard. I flinched. But when I looked, nothing. No cracks, no damage, no body. I checked the mirrors, and there was no one there, on the road. No sign of anything. Still, something felt off, like something was wrong with the air inside the car now. So what did I do? I flicked the lights off again, just for a moment. Click, darkness, click, lights on, and in that tiny flicker of darkness, I saw it. In the passenger seat, a shape, a figure, not a person exactly, but person-shaped. A shifting black mass with vague human features, just sitting there beside me, motionless. And then it was gone. When the lights came on again, there was nothing, an empty seat, no trace of it. I swerved to the shoulder and stopped the car. My hands were shaking, but I wanted to be sure. I did it again. Click. There it was. Even though it was pitch black and the figure was featureless, I just knew that this thing was looking right at me. Click. My engine roared to life. I hit the gas and I peeled out before the lights could fully even come back on. I didn't think, I didn't breathe, I just kept driving, barreling down the mountain road, foot pinned to the floor, chasing the safety of civilization. Eventually I made it to the main road, the national highway. There were street lights, passing cars, neon signs in the distance. I figured that was enough, bright lights, other people. Whatever I'd seen was gone now. Just to make sure, I tried it one last time. Click. Darkness. Click. There it was again. still staring at me, expressionless, but I could feel it, like a pressure in the air. Like its attention had weight to it. "Don't look at me." That's all I wanted to say, but I couldn't even breathe. And from that moment on, I knew whatever it was wasn't part of the road. It was part of the dark. I sped to the nearest family restaurant I could find, one of those 24/7 ones. I pulled into the lot, shut off the engine, and just like in a Hollywood movie, I bailed out of the car the moment the lights went dead. I didn't even bother locking the car. I sat in that restaurant until morning. I didn't sleep, and I didn't eat. I just drank coffee. When it was fully bright outside, I finally headed back to my parents' place. I didn't want to be alone. And the very next day, I took the car in for a purification at my local shrine. The priest said it was probably fine now, but he added something strange. "Your car is different." He didn't explain what that meant, and I didn't really want to ask him. All I'll say is this: if you're driving through the mountains at night, don't turn off the lights. Not even for fun. Especially if you're in one of those areas with old roadside shrines, or Doshojin statues, Jizos, guardian deities meant to protect travelers. I feel like they attract things when the lights go out. Traveling alone in another country can be disorientating enough. Unfamiliar streets, unfamiliar faces, and a language you don't quite speak. But what if in the middle of all that, you spotted someone you knew, someone who shouldn't be there? That's exactly what happened to this person in Germany. And it might have saved their life. It's been about a month since the Karuizawa bus accident. Thinking about that crash reminded me of something that happened to me around 20 years ago, something I still can't fully explain. At the time, I was on a work trip in Germany. 3 days of business meetings back to back, and I hadn't had a single chance to relax. My return flight was booked out of Frankfurt, so I figured it would be stupid to come all this way and not see anything. So I gave myself a few hours in Cologne before heading back to the airport. The place was stunning. The cathedral wasn't just big, it made you feel small in the way that was almost kind of spiritual. It was the kind of architecture that forces you to look up, even if your neck starts aching. I wandered around the plaza, had a beer in the crisp winter air, bought one of those enormous sausages from a street vendor. Everything felt vivid, different, even though I was on my own. Eventually, my sightseeing window was up. I walked to the bus terminal to catch the coach to Frankfurt Airport. The one I needed was a smaller model, maybe 20 seats, and I got there just as it pulled in. A few other travelers were already queuing to board. I remember adjusting my bag strap, thinking about what book I might read on the trip, when something caught my eye. Off in the distance, beyond the flow of people, 2 women were waving in my direction. At first I didn't believe it, but they looked exactly like my sisters. My actual sisters. I'm the youngest of 3 siblings. Both my sisters are older, married with kids. The idea of them being here together on a random trip to Germany of all places, without ever mentioning it to me, did not make sense. And yet their faces, the way they moved, I knew them. I stood there for a moment, frozen between logic and instinct. It was impossible. But the longer I stared, the more certain I became that it was them. And they were waving directly at me, not just casual recognition either. It felt urgent. The line for boarding was moving, and it was nearly my turn. I stepped out of the queue, craning my neck up to get a better look, and started my way towards where I'd seen my sisters. I figured I could at least ask them what the hell they were doing. But the bus area was busy. Tourists with rolling luggage, locals brushing past with the ease of someone who belonged there. By the time I reached the spot, they were gone. There was no trace of them in the crowd. I glanced back. My bus was still boarding, but now people were climbing aboard faster, and then the driver closed the luggage hab, gave a sharp look around, got into his seat, and a moment later, the door hissed shut. And just like that, the bus pulled away without me. Annoying, sure, but not a disaster. The next airport bus would be in 2 hours. It was still enough time to make my flight. I told myself I'd just have to wait. But the image of my sisters stayed with me. That strange, almost incessant wave. Back then I didn't have a mobile phone with international roaming. Even if I had, the time difference in Japan meant calling home would be a big hassle. So I sat there, feeling unsettled, watching the steady churn of buses coming and going. Maybe 30 minutes later, the terminal's television caught my attention. One of the screens had switched to breaking news. I didn't understand every word of German, but I didn't need to. The images were clear enough. A coach, same model, same company logo, lay crumpled at the bottom of a steep embankment. Rescue workers in fluorescent jackets swarmed the wreckage. The caption read, "Cologne to Frankfurt Airport. Bus plunges off-road into ravine. Multiple fatalities." I felt my stomach drop. It was the exact bus I should have been on, the one that had left without me. The report continued. There were injuries, but the conditions were severe. By the time I heard the full story later, every passenger had died. It even made the news back in Japan. When I returned home, I called both my sisters to ask, half hoping there was some strange coincidence that they had been in Germany, and somehow we just failed to communicate. But no, neither had traveled abroad. Neither had any idea what I was talking about. Sometimes you hear these stories about people being pulled away from accidents by strangers who turn out not to exist. Saved by something inexplicable. Maybe it wasn't them. Maybe they were just two women who happened to look like my sisters. But why would they have waved directly at me like that? That's the thing I can't figure out. I still don't know. All I do know is that for years later, I couldn't bring myself to get on a bus in a foreign country. Not after that. Sorry, there's no big twist. That's just what happened. This one came from a friend of mine. He's not really the superstitious type. What he is obsessed with abandoned villages. You'd be surprised how many there are in Japan. Hundreds of mountain towns that emptied out after the war, some even before, left to rot. No electricity, no people, just old houses, half swallowed up by the woods. He spends his free time riding his motorcycle through forgotten forest roads, trying to find the ones that aren't on maps anymore. Old forestry trails, broken mountain passes. If there's a path, he'll follow it, especially if someone tells him it leads to a lost village. He heard about an abandoned village deep in the mountains. Nothing official, no name, just a rumor passed between older riders. About a place that wasn't marked on GPS, but could still be reached if you knew the right route. So he went looking. The trail was rough, narrow, cracked and completely overgrown in parts. But that didn't bother him. What did bother him was the atmosphere. He told me the deeper he rode, the quieter it got. Not peaceful, not relaxing, dead quiet. No birds, no insects, not even the wind in the trees, just the hum of his engine and the occasional crunch of gravel under his wheels. Eventually the trail curved into a darker patch of the woods, and that's where he saw a sign of what he came in search of. A half-collapsed wooden signpost by the side of the road, rotting, crooked, covered in moss, but still standing. He stopped his bike to check it out. Most of the writing had faded, but he could make out just enough to confirm it. There had been a village ahead, a small one, maybe 50 or 60 years ago. Exactly what he was looking to find. But then he saw something else, nailed just below the old sign. Buried in the weeds and rotting leaves was another board, cheap plywood, warped and stained, but somehow newer. Red paint smeared across it in jagged, uneven strokes. Not brushed, smeared, like someone had used their hands. It looked as if it had been written in a panic. Hitokinshi. Humans forbidden. No explanation, no symbols, no official markings, just a rejection, like whatever lay beyond that point was no longer for us. He stood there for a while, and then he heard something, a sound from deeper in the woods, far up the road, around the bend where the trees grew close and the shadows seemed thicker. It was a clacking noise, soft at first, then louder. Clack, click, clack, like bones being tapped together, or like teeth chattering, without a mouth. Then came the second sound, a wet, heavy dragging, like something slick was being pulled across dirt and stone. Drag, scrape, drag. The noises would stop, but then they would start again. No breathing, no footsteps, just clack, clack, drag, and silence. He couldn't move for a moment. Even his bike seemed to have gone silent. Cooling in the stillness. He told me that it felt like the forest itself was waiting with him, like it knew something was coming. He didn't want to find out what, though. He got back on his bike, turned it around carefully, and rode back the way he came. He didn't speed, he didn't stop, and he didn't look back once. Later, when he told me this story, I asked him what he thought might have been back there. He hesitated, but then he said he wasn't sure. But he offered me a couple of guesses. Maybe it was a yokai, something native to those mountains. He mentioned the Surube Otoshi, a yokai that lives in the treetops and drops down like a wrecking ball to crush trespassers. Or the Yamajiji, a mountain ogre that mimics human voices to lure hikers off the path. But he said it didn't feel like that. It didn't feel tricksterish. He said it felt hungry, deliberate, like something that had crawled out of the earth and learned how to walk upright. He even joked, well, half-joked, about cannibals. You hear stories about them sometimes, whole villages that went dark during famines or isolations, when help never came and hunger won. What if the sign wasn't a threat, but a final warning from the last person who lived there? What if they tried to stop someone from making the same mistake? And then there's the worst theory of all, the one he only said once, in a low voice. What if something older than people lives there now? Not a yokai, not even a ghost, just something that's been waiting. He doesn't ride in that area anymore. And if you ever bring up abandoned villages, he'll tell you the same thing every time. If you ever see a hand-painted sign that says Hitokinshi, humans forbidden, turn around. That place isn't for you. Some people find coins or lost tickets on empty train seats. In this next story, someone kept finding something else. Something bound, deliberate, and meant to be found by the wrong person. Whenever 3 conditions line up, something unsettling happens to me. 1, I'm traveling alone. 2, the trip isn't related to school life. And 3, I'm on the train. This is the most extreme example. It was the day I took the subway to attend a trial lecture at university. The cabin I boarded was unusually empty. No loud commuters, no cluster of students, just that thin metallic hum you hear when the train is moving with hardly anyone on board. That's when I noticed it. On the seat directly across from me was an envelope. At first I thought it was just lost property, maybe someone's documents or a letter. I thought I would hand it in at the next stop, so I picked it up without thinking. The paper was thick, slightly rough, the flap unsealed, and covering almost every inch of the surface, written in cramped, neat handwriting, were names, dozens of them, maybe hundreds. They looked like real people's names. The envelope wasn't flat either. Inside, something bundled together shifted slightly when I tilted it. The moment I felt the weight and texture of it, the thought dropped into my head, clear as anything. This is a cursed object, and the thing inside is hair. I didn't even want to open it to check. As soon as I stepped off the subway, I went straight into a convenience store, bought a pack of salt, and put the envelope in a plastic bag, and I poured the salt over it until it was buried. There was no way I was bringing that home. I left it still in the bag, in a nearby garbage collection area. I felt a bit guilty. What if it was someone's forgotten item? But everything in my gut told me to get rid of it. I thought that was the end of it, but 3 months later, after taking an entrance exam, my mum had accompanied me. On the way there, but I was going home alone, I saw another envelope. It was on a different line, a different seat, but I knew straight away what it was. The handwriting was different. The number of characters in each name varied, so it wasn't the exact same envelope, but the structure, the feel of it, was identical. I dealt with it the same as I dealt with the one before. A week later, I had another exam at another university, and there it was again. Same kind of envelope, same feeling in my chest when I looked at it. And then the very next day, another exam, another envelope, only this one was different. It looked older. The flap was torn just enough that I could see what was inside. Hair, tightly bound, with a strip of paper like a talisman. The smell coming from it was foul, like something that had been wet and rotting in a closed space. Nobody else on the train seemed to notice. They didn't even glance at it. This time, I didn't just want to throw it away. I wanted to call a friend who lived in a detached house with a yard and ask if I could come over. We dug a shallow pit, placed the envelope inside, covered the thing in salt until it was buried, and then we built a fire over it and burned the whole thing. The stench that rose from it stung our nostrils. It was foul. When all that was left was ash, we scattered it into a river. Before and after burning it, we sprinkled ourselves with salt, just in case. And since that day, I've never seen one of those envelopes again. I still have no idea what they were, or why I was the one finding them. I just wanted to post it here to see if anybody else knows. There's some additional notes. When I say outside of school life, I mean trips not related to commuting, school events or club activities, no tournaments, no training trips, nothing like that. Also, there's this other thing. Whenever my mother and I travel, just the two of us, by train, we always seem to encounter someone in trouble and end up helping them. During the trip to that first exam, for example, On the way there, we gave direction to 2 foreign tourists. On the way back, that was when I found the envelope. One last detail. Whenever I find one of these envelopes, the train car is always, without fail, strangely empty. It's almost like everybody else knew not to get on. This happened when I was in my 3rd year of junior high school. I came home from school one day, opened the door to my room, and stopped in my tracks. My dad was there, sitting alone, crying. It's not a sight you'd expect. He wasn't the sort of man to cry easily. I'd never seen it, not even when our family pet died. At first I was startled. Then I asked what had happened. He told me he'd been feeling unwell that afternoon, so he'd come home early from work and gone to bed. While sleeping, he had a dream. In the dream, his father, my grandfather, appeared. My grandfather apologized to him for something that had happened decades ago, when my dad was still a child. "I'm sorry I didn't buy that toy you wanted." That was it. Nothing else. My dad said that when he woke up, he felt this overwhelming sadness, and before he knew it, he was crying. Not just a few tears, though. The kind of crying where it's hard to breathe. Though he couldn't explain why. To be honest, the sight of a middle-aged man crying over a dream about his father unsettled me. There was something about it. The rawness of it. It made me feel like I was intruding on something I wasn't meant to see. I didn't say anything more. I just stepped quietly back into my own room and I shut the door. I can't remember exactly how long after that it happened, but I think it was within a week. The phone rang, and then came the news. My grandfather had died, suddenly. There had been no warning signs, no long illness. He was just gone. Later, thinking back, I wondered, was that Mushi no Shirase? Hi, Jay here. In Japanese, Mushi no Shirase is a kind of omen. A subtle, instinctive premonition, trying to warn you. A kind of warning you feel in your body before something happens. The phrase literally means notification from an insect, as if some small creature inside you senses the change before your mind does. A sign or a premonition. Back to the story. At the funeral, and the days afterwards, I didn't see my dad shed a single tear. Not once. The only time I'd seen him cry was that day, in his room, after the dream. And yet, that wasn't the part that kept me up at night. For weeks afterwards, I couldn't shake that thought. What if one night, my parents appear in my dream? And what if they smiled or apologized for something small, like my grandfather had done? Some forgotten incident from years ago? Would that mean the same thing was coming for them? That thought rooted itself inside my mind, and for a while, I dreaded falling asleep. Hi, Jay here. Sorry to interrupt, but just a quick reminder. This episode's stories all came from you, so if you've got an idea for the next viewer suggestion video, leave it in the comments. I'll go through them all, and your idea might be the one we use next time. Back to the stories. When I was in elementary school, there was this shuttered Horumon yaki place near my neighborhood. A rundown BBQ grill joint. You know, yakiniku, that kind of thing. It had been closed for who knows how long. It was the kind of place where the sign was faded and the windows looked like they hadn't been touched in years. It was right by the public pool I went to all the time during summer, and me and my friends would spend the day swimming, and then on the walk back we'd wander past it. Eventually curiosity got the better of us and we decided to explore. Inside it was a mess. Broken chairs, a cash register with a drawer hanging open, piles of junk everywhere, like the owners had left in a hurry. And then there were the magazines, those kinds of magazines, scattered on the floor. We were kids, young men, so of course our hearts were pounding like we just found buried treasure. Up to that point it still felt like a game, just stupid summer holiday fun. But then we pushed the door open to the toilet. The walls, the floor, the porcelain, everything was smeared and splattered with what could only be described as blood. Not a few drops, but the whole place was stained deep, dark red. I remember the smell too. Even though that place had been shut for ages, there was this faint, metallic tang in the air that hit the back of your throat. That was the moment the atmosphere shifted. It wasn't fun anymore. We didn't speak, we didn't make a plan, we just turned around and got out of there as fast as we could. Later I told my friend about it. I thought he'd react the same way I did. Maybe look a little freaked out, maybe say we shouldn't go back. Instead, his eyes lit up and he said, "Let's go check it out." So, about a day later, I went back with him, plus one of the guys from the first time. 3 of us, same route, same broken window we slipped in through. This time we didn't waste any time poking around. We already knew the layout. And the longer we were in there, the more it felt like we were tempting fate. We stepped back outside and into the sunlight and stopped dead. There were 4 or 5 men standing just beyond the entrance. Dark suits, sunglasses, hair slicked back, not the flashy TV drama kind of gangster. These guys had that kind of quiet, dangerous look, the type who don't need to raise their voice to make you listen. Even as kids, we didn't need anybody to tell us who they were. You just knew. Yakuza. And then one of them spoke, low and sharp. "What the hell were you doing in there?" We stammered something about looking around. Then another man stepped closer. His shadow fell over us and then he asked, "Did you see anything in there?" I didn't even glance at the others. We all said no, in unison. "Nothing. We saw nothing." He stared at us for a couple of seconds and then quietly said, "Good." And that was the truth we all decided to stick to, no matter what. Because even at that age, I understood. If we told him what we'd seen, the blood, anything, it wouldn't have ended well for us. We left without another word. They didn't follow, but I remember walking home with my mouth dry, knowing that whatever had happened in that place, it was nothing a bunch of kids should have been anywhere near. When I was in elementary school, my dad finally built us a house. It was our own home, a proper detached place we could call ours. We'd always rented before, so for my parents, it was a dream come true. The day we moved in, everybody was smiling, but not long after we got settled, something strange started happening. A woman's ghost began appearing in the house. I never saw her myself, but my parents did, often enough that it became a real problem. My dad tried to keep calm, but my mother took it badly. She lost weight, she couldn't sleep, and the tension in the house grew heavy. There were days I would come home from school and find her just staring out of the window like she was waiting for someone or something to appear. That New Year's, my grandfather visited our house for the first time. He stepped inside, glanced around, and said to my father in a quiet but certain voice, "Shouldn't build a house in a place like this." No explanation, just that. Then he set about making a kamidana, a small household Shinto altar, in the living room, and from his bag he took out a bundle of kampyo dried gourd strips, cooked them in tempura, and placed them as an offering. Before he left, he told my parents to make sure the offerings never ran out. After that, the woman was never seen in our house again. But my grandfather's house, that was a different story. Word came back from relatives that a ghostly woman had started appearing there instead. When someone asked him about it, he just smiled and said, "I live alone. It's not so bad having some company. Makes the place feel less empty." Not long after, he had a sudden heart problem and passed away. It was quick. No illness, no time to prepare. His funeral was small, just close family and a few neighbors. But a handful of people, including my dad, said that they swore they saw a strange woman walking slowly around the edge of the venue. No one recognized her, and she didn't approach anyone, she just lingered. I've always had this feeling that maybe my grandfather and the ghost became close, that they stayed together until the end. When we went to clear out his house afterwards, I was struck by how unlike a typical solitary old man's home it looked. There were fresh flowers in vases, stuffed toys propped up on chairs, framed photos of landscapes like he'd been sharing them with someone, and most curious of all, slips of paper all over the house like fragments of a conversation. Short, everyday notes written as though they were part of an ongoing exchange. "Is the show on TV any good? Shall we go to bed soon?" Little things like that. Very ordinary, very human. My grandfather never had dementia. His mind was sharp, right until the end. So who were the notes for? That ghost was never seen anywhere after his death. I still don't know if what I'm imagining is true. There's a lot of ifs and buts, isn't there? But a part of me hopes it's all true. I like the idea that he had some company, and somehow that someone made him smile, even if they might have been otherworldly. My grandfather passed away 5 years ago, at the age of 85. This is a story he told me long before that. When he was young, he used to commute to work every day by bicycle. His route took him over a large bridge. Underneath the bridge was a strip of land, set lower than the road. At the far edge of that land was a drop, maybe 5 meters, and below it a river flowed. Right there on that lower ground stood a hospital. One night after working late, my grandfather was cycling home when he heard something. It sounded like someone diving into the water. Not a splash from above, but that deep, heavy whump you hear when a body hits a fast-flowing river. It wasn't the first time he heard such a thing. There was a story about that hospital passed around the area. Years earlier, a patient staying there couldn't sleep one night and asked their family to take them out for a short walk outside. Somehow during that walk, they fell over the edge into the river, and they didn't survive. The family had been right there when it happened. But it had been raining heavily, and the river was swollen, and the current was too strong for them to do anything. And on this particular night, it had rained earlier as well. The river was moving fast, same as in that story. Remembering that, my grandpa pedaled down to the hospital, and he told the staff what he'd heard, just in case. After the accident, the hospital had put up a fence along the cliffside, but it wasn't much of a barrier. Climbable, if you really wanted to. A few days later, my grandfather was in a minor road accident. Nothing life-threatening, thankfully, but enough to warrant a short stay in hospital. And by coincidence, it was that very same hospital. One night during his stay, a nurse came quickly into the ward, glancing around in a hurry, as though counting the beds to make sure all the patients were still there. She didn't say anything, she just checked and left. After she was gone, the man in the next bed struck up a conversation with my granddad. They spoke about where they grew up and got to know each other a little. Eventually, the man in the next bed leaned over to him and spoke in a low voice and said, "You know about the guy who died here, right? Fell into the river. Thing is, there's a rumor, that he didn't fall, that his own family pushed him. And every so often, on nights like this, when it's raining heavy, at around the same time it happened, people hear the sound of someone hitting the river. The hospital gets a call from someone saying a patient might have fallen in again, and the nurses have to go check, just in case. But between me and you, that sound you heard, that's the sound of him being pushed into the water. He's doomed to repeat it again and again." Imagine the betrayal. My grandfather eventually recovered and was discharged. Life went back to normal for us all. He forgot about the accident, the stay, and even that conversation, until one night, after another late shift, he was riding home over the same bridge, and it had been raining. The streets were wet, and the air cool and heavy, and from below, that same unmistakable sound. He didn't stop, he didn't go and check. From that day on, if it was raining, or if it had just rained, he never took that route again. And he's warned a whole family to follow his example. When I was in elementary school, we were digging in the school's vegetable garden one day, when something unusual came up from the soil. It was a small ceramic fox mask, pure white, made from kawarake clay. Hi, Jay here. Kawarake refers to unglazed earthenware, often used for traditional sake cups, offerings, or rituals in Japan. Back to the story. A fox's face, styled with slanted almond-shaped eyes and narrow features. Us kids kept digging and we found more things. There were these little clay figures of the lucky 7 gods, a miniature magic mallet from folklore said to grant wishes, and other charms and figures which were meant to bring good fortune. We were just kids, so we naturally thought, this is treasure. Everyone grabbed something they liked. There had only been one fox among the finds, and I was the one who dug it up, and I didn't want to let it go. And besides, the other kids said things like, its eyes are horrible, it's creepy. But that didn't bother me. I thought it looked beautiful in a strange way, so I happily took the fox home. Even the teacher who'd been standing nearby watching us didn't tell us off or tell us not to take it away. For a while I kept it carefully wrapped and tucked into a drawer of my desk. But a few years later, after I started middle school, I saw a TV program about Ningyo Kuyo, a ceremonial offering and disposal of dolls especially ones thought to have absorbed human attachment or spirit. Watching it, I began to wonder if maybe I should do the same thing for my little fox mask. I asked around, what were those things we dug up in the school garden? None of the adults seemed to know, but a few said if something had been buried in the earth like that, maybe it would be better to return it to a shrine rather than keep it in your home. And by coincidence, my family had a trip to Kyoto coming up. The fox figure meant Inari in Japan. Inari or Kami is the kami deity of fertility, prosperity, and agriculture, and foxes, kitsune, are considered the deity's messengers. So I thought, if I'm going to return it anywhere, the right place would be an Inari shrine. Not just any Inari shrine. The main one, Fushimi Inari Taisha in Kyoto. I didn't exactly want to give it up, but I felt like the time had come, and visiting Fushimi Inari sounded exciting. On the day of the trip, I wrapped the fox very carefully, so it wouldn't break, and I slipped it into my bag. Once I was on the Shinkansen, I fell asleep almost immediately, and that's when I had the strangest dream. In it, I was still on the train, exactly like in reality, except the carriage was empty, except for me and a young man sitting directly opposite. He had light brown hair, he wore jeans, and he had a plain white t-shirt, and on his wrist was a purple wristband. His skin was pale, like porcelain, and he was looking at me with an awkward, slightly troubled expression. He said, "Listen, going to a shrine is fine, but don't take me to Fushimi. I mean, think about it. If somebody suddenly told you you had to go meet some big, important person, wouldn't you feel uncomfortable? I just want to stay in my hometown. Just take it easy. Please." That purple wristband, I realized in my dream, was the exact same color as the cloth I'd wrapped around the fox mask years earlier to keep it from getting scratched in the drawer. And when we reached Kyoto, we still visited Fushimi Inari Taisha, but I didn't hand over the fox mask. Instead, I asked one of the shrine attendants, "Hi, I have something like this. What should I do with it?" And they told me, "You should dedicate it to your local Inari shrine, or to your Ujigami-sama, the guardian deity of your neighborhood." So I decided to take it back home and just do that. The night before I planned to go to my local Inari shrine, I had another dream, and that same man, that young man I saw on the train, he appeared, and this time he smiled and said, "Thanks for everything. Here, I'm going to give this back to you." And in the dream, he handed me a purple wristband. The next day, I took the fox mask to the local Inari shrine and offered it there. I'm sorry, it's not particularly a scary story, but it was very strange, and it's something that stayed with me ever since. Again, not frightening, just strange. I do long-distance cycling as a hobby. One time I ended up having to spend the night in a parking lot of a drive-in on a certain mountain pass. I hadn't planned on it. I booked a place to stay beyond the pass, but I miscalculated the time it would take to get there. It wasn't a problem though. I always carry a sleeping bag with me just in case. By the time I arrived at the drive-in, it was long closed. It was the kind of place for late-night crowds anyway. No packs of street racers, no tourists. Only the occasional car passing by. The stillness of the mountains at night is quite different from anywhere else. The air feels thinner, sharper, sounds die quickly, as if swallowed by the trees. I slid into my sleeping bag, right there beside the building, and after a while I drifted off. At some point I stirred. I wasn't sure why at first, maybe a shift in the air, maybe a sound, but I opened my eyes to pitch blackness. I lay still, and I listened. And then I heard a man's voice far away, almost lost in the distance. Not a scream, more like someone shouting the same words over and over. But I couldn't make out what they were saying. They were too far away. At first, I'll admit, I felt a knot of unease. Being alone in the mountains, in the dark, hearing a voice like that, your mind can't help but go to bad places. But I reminded myself that this was deep in the mountains, and not too far from a well-known hiking course. Maybe someone had gotten lost. If that was the case, the worst thing I could do was to ignore them, right? So I cupped my hands to my mouth, and I called out, stretching the words so that they'd carry. "Do you need help?" And the man didn't stop shouting. Same rhythm, same tone. I wasn't even clear if he heard me. Still, I thought the voice might be closer now. Maybe he was moving towards me. "Are you okay? The path is close by," I called. Again. And again. The man's words were starting to take shape now, though not enough to understand, and the voice was definitely closer. I tried again. "Are you hurt?" The voice stopped completely. I lay there in silence, listening. Not even the wind moved through the trees. Has he fallen? Gotten hurt in the dark? I took a deep breath, ready to call out one last time, and then it started. Only this time, the sound wasn't coming from the same direction. It felt like it was coming from right behind me. I didn't move at first. The shift in direction didn't make sense. I didn't hear any footsteps. No crunch of gravel, no rustle of brush in the time it would have taken to get there. The voice was nearer now, and near enough that I could understand it. "Don't leave me behind," the voice was screaming. I left the sleeping bag where it was, got on my bike, and I pedaled down and fast as I could. I didn't want to look back. Hi, Jay here. When I first read this, I was struck by how much it sits in that grey area between possible and impossible. Some commenters thought that it could have been a yama no kai, a strange presence that calls you into the mountains, and that calling back to an unknown voice in the dark is the worst thing you can do out there. There are plenty of old superstitions in Japan, many warning against answering voices you hear in the wilderness at night. One theory was oddly comical at first glance, that if it really was the ghost of someone who died in the mountains, maybe they were genuinely confused by the cyclists asking about the injuries, thinking, "Why is he worried about that? I'm already dead." Others focused on the wording, "Don't leave me behind." It reminded a few people of Oitekebori, an old Edo period ghost story about a fisherman hearing a voice in the dark telling him to leave it behind. A warning or a lure. And of course there's the practical side. Maybe it was a real person, a lost hiker, or someone in trouble. But that raises its own problems. Why would the voice suddenly change? Why would the voice suddenly shift to behind the narrator? Close enough to understand, without a single sound or movement through the woods. Whatever it was, if it was me, I wouldn't be camping alone in the mountains again, anytime soon. Thank you for watching, and if you've got a creepy concept, an urban legend, or just a strange question you'd like me to dig into, drop it in the comments below, and you might hear your suggestion in the next video. Make sure you're subscribed and have notifications on so you don't miss it, and keep an eye out for the community post where I collect new ideas each month. Until next time, sleep well. I'll see you soon.